Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the Blog Cabin to chat about life. And today we are chatting with Neal. He is an amazing author. He has had an amazing life full of turmoil. His book is Trauma is a Thief, and it's a memoir. But Neal, welcome to the show. And I want to say Dr. Neal King, PhD, because I know how hard those PhDs are, because I have a daughter that's actually working for her PhD in California as well, because you live in California. She's going to school in Irvine. And my son-in-law just finished his in Caltech. So I know how hard those PhD works are. So
They tend not to give them away. You got to work for them. That's true.
Mm-hmm. So welcome to the show, Neal. Tell us a little about yourself.
So I'm a Navy brat. So that's relevant in the sense that I grew up in a military family. My father and older brother were career naval officers. I was the black sheep of the family. I was a conscientious objector and a pacifist my whole life. So I differentiated myself in those ways. We moved a lot, which is the title of a short story I wrote in a poet friend's anthology about boyhood, with some insight into military culture. Unfortunately, the abuse that I describe in the book, the trauma that I describe in the book, happened pretty much within my family. Very early on, we were abandoned by both parents. And then my father was a sociopath, a narcissist, a pedophile. He abused both my brother and myself sexually. And when the family keeps moving around, especially, you don't make contact outside so much, and you're stuck with the guy who's in charge. And it happened to be this monster of a pretend father. So there's that. Education has been my escape in many ways. I'm a psychologist. I have been a teacher and a professor and an administrator and a consultant and a writer, and have found in the various ways in which I can apply myself mentally have really been my tools for ultimately, I don't say you can entirely escape or erase your trauma, but get it under control, put it in the back seat, and not allow it to be the driver and control my life.
Yeah, and you had a lot of trauma. I mean, like you said, your dad was a pedophile, but your mom also had addiction and substance abuse, and even your siblings as well went through that. So how did you escape it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I am the only surviving member of my family. My brother drank himself to death at age 47 after he retired from the Navy. My sister struggled with addiction. She and my mother both were alcoholics, and my sister had some drug issues, and they both had a couple of cancers. So, I mean, life was not easy for them. And my father died from his own alcoholism at the age of 71. So how did I escape? I think there's partly a genetic thing. My partner and I still enjoy a glass of wine with dinner. I've never been tempted to just keep going after the first sip the way that a lot of alcoholics do. So I have to credit that. But I think there's also an acknowledgement on my part that I would rather wrestle with my demons and face them head on than surrender to them and numb myself to them. And so I think it's the combination of those two things. And I think I've been fortunate that I've been able to, survive, connect with some really good people who've been really helpful to me, which I think is a key thing for a trauma survivor, is find the good people in your life who are the bright lights, who are going to be there for you, who are going to support you. And that makes all the difference in the world.
That's so true. And you had some really key people in your life that pop up for a certain period of your life, and then they leave, and then they're replaced by other certain people. So can we talk about, like, for instance, your friend, I think it was Michael, who put you in charge of this whole group that you were traveling around to different universities and things like that?
That's right. Yeah. So the group was the International Association of University Presidents. I met Michael when he was the president in New Jersey, and I was president of Antioch University in Los Angeles. We had a good chemistry. He was about to assume the presidency of the organization and invited me into his administration kind of as his operations guy. And I didn't know at the time that he had a cancer diagnosis, and he died about a year into his 3-year presidency. And so the board asked me to step in and take over that presidency. But yeah, Michael, you're right to pinpoint or point to that. Michael was one of several people in my life who said, "Something in you that I like and I respect, and I want to be closer." And then he respected me, he liked me, he empowered me. And you're right, I have been fortunate in being able to attract people like that key to my survival across my life as a boy, as a young man, as an adult.
And you've also attracted some animals, some dogs. I mean, first of all, I want to say you owned my dream dog. I want a Great Pyrenees so bad, but I do have a Shih Tzu, so I'm okay with that right now. But when I read that Great Pyrenees, I'm like, and then you had the what, Tom Dog, and then you had the other ones as well.
Yeah, Tom Dog was an Irish setter. He was a godsend, literally. I mean, as I say in the book, I was living up in the woods off Mendocino in Northern California. I was out with some friends cutting firewood because we had potbelly stoves in our cabins. We didn't have other heat. And he just appeared out of nowhere. This young Irish setter, and he plopped himself upside down in front of me. And as I said in the book, I thought I should have a dog. I wasn't planning on having a dog. And he was a great adventurer with me for only the 2 or 3 years we were together. I made the difficult choice to surrender him to my sister when I took a position in London and I wasn't able to take him with me. And the Great Pyrenees Bentley, we've had 2 pairs of dogs over a period of about 20 years. And right now we've lost them all. They're waiting on the other side of that bridge for us. And the Great Pyrenees mix was Bentley, and he was just a gentle giant and just a chill being. He didn't like to walk. He was very eccentric. He didn't like to play with the ball. He had his certain games he liked, and he just a sweet, sweet, sweet guy. I think of in my life, I know not everybody loves dogs. I love dogs, and they've been like spirit guides. They've really been tremendous companions in darker moments. And again, I feel very fortunate. My dog Cookie, when growing up, I said, can we go get one of those puppies? And my parents said, are you going to take care of him? I said, I'll take care of him. I'll take care of him. And so he was the first in many years of many dogs, and miss them all.
Yep, I know. And I had a dog named Cookie growing up too, but she was a Chihuahua Yorkshire Terrier mix. So.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So they used to say about my Cookie that he was so ugly, he was cute. He was his mother was a Scottie, and when she was in heat, we were living in Monterey. I guess a neighborhood kid felt she was lonely, so shoved his male something over the fence, and so Cookie came out being kind of a mix of different things. But I always thought he was cute. I never thought he was ugly. So.
That's so cute. And there's another thing that I want to point out that really stuck in my mind when you talked about the VW bus, because I had a VW bus growing up.
Is that right?
My parents used to be, we live in North Carolina. My dad was in the Marine Corps. So when you're talking about Navy, I'm a Marine Corps parent. So I know that. We used to take the summers. My dad would take 2 weeks off in the summer. My parents are originally from Massachusetts. So they would drive the VW bus up to the Massachusetts, and my dad would fly home, and then he would fly back up to last week and then drive the VW bus home. So many road trips. And I was like, oh, that's something in common. So I have to know, what color was your VW bus?
Well, I had a couple of them, but the main one, which I think of sort of as my magic bus, was a 1968 blue and white. So It was that really pretty blue with a white top, and it wasn't a camper. I often took out the middle seat because, as you know, if you take that middle seat out, then you can sleep in the floor area. Later, I had a camper with the top pops up, and you can, and had an ice, not a refrigerator, but an ice box where you put a block of ice, and the seats folded down and the table popped out. So it was really kind of it was a camper, and that one was kind of an off-white. What color were yours?
Red and white and orange and white.
All right.
See, once they got one they liked, they just kept buying the same car over and over and over again.
Yeah, I think I had 3 or 4 of them over the years, and as you know, people hated you when you were driving one of those going up a hill, because they have these little engines and they go put put put. They don't go very fast.
Yeah, for sure. So, what made you decide to write Trauma is a Thief?
Yeah, so I had different people tell me along the way. That there's a story there, and it's a powerful story, and it should be told. And I thought, yeah, no. And then I was a psychotherapist for 14 years, and I worked with a number of other trauma victims and survivors. They all taught me an enormous amount. When you're in that business, you come to love every human being that you work with, who graces you with their confidence to work with them through their stuff. And I realized that how lonely trauma can be. So that's a part of it. I thought, I can bear witness. I can talk about my lived experience and offer. I'm not the poster boy, but through a lot of struggle and a lot of work and a lot of luck, I have a pretty good life today. I'm in my late 70s. I don't have too much to complain about, but it wasn't easy, and it was required to have a lot of help along the way. I also felt that I wanted to leave some testimonial for my siblings, and tell tell the story. And I wanted my father not to be able to get away with his crap.
Mm.
And he's been dead for 30 years, but I still felt kind of, a victory in a certain way just by telling his story, because he exercised so much dark power and he was good at it in a way that he kept other people off balance and feeling not powerful. My mother was, I think he destroyed my mother. My brother really wounded my sister very badly, wounded me, but not as powerfully. So to bear witness, to offer my story as one example of how one deals with trauma, as a testimonial to my siblings.
Yeah, and the one thing I really do like is you don't go into detail about exactly what your father did. You just mention, like, I don't want to say you gloss over it, but you don't go in so much detail that it's like you're reading like a pornographic novel or anything like that. You're just like, this is what happened, and you use the proper, terms that you're supposed to use. And I like the fact that you talk about how even when your dad died, though, you still felt a little bit of sadness knowing that he was gone, and even with your brother as well, and how your brother couldn't get his story out.
Right. Yeah. When my dad died, he had an esophageal hemorrhage. He was a drunk, and I didn't even know there was such a thing as an esophageal hemorrhage. But researching it later, it's where the alcohol wears down the tissue of the esophagus, and he died fairly suddenly. And my siblings were both alive. My brother was in Seattle. My sister was in San Diego. I was in Berkeley. So we convened at his place in the Central Coast in Morro Bay. We had him cremated. We invited a young man who he had horribly inappropriate relationship with from the time that he was about 12. He was a neighbor boy, and my father, I guess, seduced him. I don't know how else we can say it, and engaged in a sexual relationship with him, which was one of many times that my mother's heart was broken because it was carried on right in front of her. So we invited him to come with us. We thought, it's not our place to judge that relationship, but we know that they were important to each other, and that we felt that he too could use the closure. So on a very cold January morning, we carried his ashes down the road and across the beach. And I was aware, I was the one carrying the ashes, that, a part of my sadness was for all what wasn't. And for all of the holes where a loving father, a loving family would have been, and then here he was. And there's a way. I say in the book, I never came to the place where I felt like I could forgive him, and I don't. I don't think there's any excuse for doing that to your own children, destroying your own family that way. He was a bright man. In my view, he was responsible to take more responsibility for his actions. But he also, he didn't have a happy life either. He was a conflicted, born, angry, ugly, spiritually ugly man, and that couldn't have been fun.
Yeah, and you talk about a time in the book where your mom disappears and you guys are given, or if I'm reading somebody else's book, but I might have gotten confused, but that you go and your dad leaves you for a while?
Close. We were very young. My sister couldn't have been more than a toddler. We were living in San Diego. My dad was overseas in the Navy. So your dad probably deployed away from the family some of the time. And my mom disappeared, and we were left with a babysitter, and then a neighbor took us in for a while, and nobody knew where she was. And so we were turned over to juvenile authorities. And before that, I don't know that it would have happened if we hadn't done this, but when she didn't come back, my brother and I set the clothes closet on fire of the neighbor who was watching us. Admittedly, it was not very nice, but I learned later, studying to become a psychologist, that fire setting is a manifestation of that abandoned children often. There's some way to what happened? Where is everybody? What's happening to me? Why did this happen? And I think my older brother started it. I was maybe 4, he was maybe 6, something like that. But it was after that we were turned over to juvenile authorities, and you can't blame anybody for it. You can't have that kind of behavior in your home and hold on to people. So they contacted the Navy, contacted my father. He came back, found my mother. She was supposedly having an affair. I only have his side of the story. So, but that early abandonment set the stage for, learning early on that, those big people, they're not trustworthy. You can't trust them. And creating a kind of shield around our hearts. I think all 3 of us did that. I did that. And it made trust very difficult for the rest of my life.
I can imagine. We need to take a brief commercial break, but we'll be right back.
People welcomed me, and they knew the pain of the journey that we'd been on because they'd been there too.
Other Parents Like Me is an online community, peer-led, for parents with kids struggling with mental health and or substance.
It's a space that's safe. Feels like I can actually share what's going on.
We offer 15 daily support groups per week and live speaker talks on Thursdays, as well as a monthly expert panel.
We also have a resource hub that has a toolkit. This includes over 1,000 articles, podcasts. There's a glossary with the most recent and relevant terms. And we have a directory that's been vetted.
The overwhelming feeling when we're sitting in a meeting and I'm telling my story and I see others shaking their head, tears falling, they understand this roller coaster and they're along for the ride.
And we are back chatting with Neal King, PhD. I got to put PhD up there. He wrote Trauma is a Thief. And like I said, it's a must read book because look at all this stuff I highlighted. I'm going to put it down in a notebook later because there's so many good tidbits in here. So, Neal, do you want to read part of your book for us?
Sure. I'll read a couple of sections. Part of the prologue, which I think sets the context and says why I did it in the first place. And then a passage from deep in the book that talks about gives it the reader an insight into what my life was like as I was trying to figure it all out and deal with it. So from the prologue, trauma is a thief. It robs you, child or adult, no matter your creed, class, gender, or culture of origin, gay or straight, of what might otherwise have been a normal trajectory for your life. It steals your innocence and imparts a deep wound, profoundly affecting your sense of self, from which you will never completely recover. Trauma can be a single event, mass shooting, rape, car accident, or a series of events over time, experiencing spousal abuse, being held as a hostage, growing up in an abusive family, fighting in a war. Trauma doesn't occur in a vacuum. There will always be a context. Sometimes it's shared, as with the COVID epidemic or in a state of war, when you know that others are experiencing what you are. Other times, you feel as if it's happening to you alone. When it happens within your family, it's the worst. You likely then have no sanctuary to which you can escape and seek protection. It's simply a part of your life. Whatever its former context, trauma is invariably a thief. It steals something essential from you that you can never fully recover. Some will never successfully integrate their trauma into their lives. Indeed, trauma takes many lives, both directly and indirectly. Addiction and suicide take the lives of many trauma victims, as do various forms of mental illness. Some victims will spend their lives attempting to flee the effects or trying to put the pieces back together with varying degrees of success, unsure exactly what that even means. Trauma can also effectively paralyze you. And then from deep in the book, when I'm talking about my own experience integrating trauma and involved in my very much in my recovery process, I say a clear life pattern emerges and repeats. When threatened, finished with a period of time, or not feeling safe, I withdraw into myself and escape, move on to something and somewhere new and different. I see now in writing these recollections that I did that in one way or another again and again, a lesson learned while very young. The abuse survivor often has no physical escape available to her or him, and so escapes internally, dissociates, leaves the body in the moment. My escapes always began with and included withdrawal from what did not feel safe, and physical escape to another reality whenever possible.
I will say that when I was reading this book, I felt for you, but then I was like, I would cheer for you. Then you would talk about something that else occurred. And then I would go, oh man, it seemed like every time you would get a leg up or you like escape a little bit, they would like something would happen in your family and you get pulled back in, like your mom getting really sick and then your dad getting sick and or your brother getting sick. You were always being pulled back in. So how were you able to survive all that?
Yeah, it's really true. And I say in the book that it reminds me of the dynamic of living in abusive spousal relationship and I had clients who were in relationships like that. And I think of one woman I worked with who she was clear in her mind that this was not good. This was not healthy. Some part of her felt like, A, she couldn't be on her own. She needed this person she was in relationship with. And B, he needed her, that if she left, his life was going to be. So it's a complicated psychology. And I mentioned that particularly when I decided to go back to school and do my doctorate and get certified as a psychologist, my sister at times felt like I had abandoned her because I was creating a life for myself. She once said, you know how to make the world work. I don't. And I've never had any success in that, which of course I felt terrible about. But at the same time, there was this part of me that said from the very beginning I'm not going to let this or let him destroy me. I'm gonna keep moving forward. That striving energy. I can't fully explain it, why we're different from each other in that way. I was the middle child. I fought. I said no. You're right. Time and again, it was like some tentacle reached out and grabbed me and tried to pull me back into it, and I had to fight it off again and move forward again. Ultimately, I think was largely. I mean, I don't pretend that I'm not wounded today. I don't pretend that there aren't, but I think was largely able to cast off that darker energy.
Do you think that's what guided you into going into psychotherapy?
Absolutely, both as a client and as a practitioner. There's no question. One of my professors at Berkeley said we all go into psychology to figure ourselves out, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. And it was absolutely transformative. I say that in the book. I left my formal education, formal training, a different person than when I started it. And those years included several very good experiences with psychotherapists as a client. And so I mentioned them in the book as well, ways in which I'm working with dreams, working directly with trauma, and even with some therapists who weren't very good. And they modeled for me how not to be as a therapist. And so that was helpful too.
I love that. Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say, absolutely. The answer is yes.
Okay. Now, there's this quote that really stood out. Is toward the end of the book, but it really stood out to me. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of stuff that stood out, but this one really stood out. And it said, "My past surrounds and intertwines my present, but is a visitor now, and I'm no longer its captive." And that was like, wow, what a thought. If only everybody in their lifetime could get to that point.
Yeah, I would wish that for any trauma survivor. And I say in another book as a similar kind of statement that trauma for so much of my early life was just this constant roar in my head and my insides, where I was always looking for where the next blow was going to come from. I was rarely feeling safe. I really didn't know what to do. I talk about flailing, and then and I say later, it's kind of a whisper now. It's still there. I still hear it. I know it's there, but it's not in control. And my past, it's a part of me. I sit in my study right now, and there are images and photos and mementos of my early life. I'm not trying to divorce myself from it, but it visits, as I say. It's not in charge.
And I love the fact that you even talk about going through this book about how you struggle trying to figure out personal relationships until you find the right one, till you find Peter, which I absolutely love. I was like, everybody deserves to be loved like that. And the fact that you found someone who loves you wholly who you are. I love that.
Yeah, I mentioned that I was 50 when we met. We've been together almost 30 years now. And I had just figured, well, I guess I'm just too damaged. It's not going to happen, and as you read in the book, I certainly made a number of attempts. My judgment, my discernment were very poor as I was trying to navigate my psychosocial relational life. And early on, I confused lust with love and thought that, if the sex is this good, then it must be love, and learned again and again that's not the case. So yeah, it was literally a godsend. And, here we are.
Yeah. And it's like with Peter, you also found that family that you needed as well, because you talk about in the book how you moved to be closer to his mom and his
Right.
immediate family. And then she ended up moving closer to you guys when you guys moved.
That's right. And, I don't really have I have some cousins who I'm grateful to have, and I have some more distant relations, but I have no immediate family. And I have a niece who I mentioned in the book who is a dear, dear soul. She's on the autism spectrum, lives in San Diego, lives in a house she inherited from her mom, my sister. And we're close, but we spend a lot of time with Peter's family, and it's kind of marvels. I marvel at the fact that he actually still has siblings, and it's like, it keeps me tethered to that part of reality where otherwise I wouldn't be.
So do you credit meeting Peter as part of your healing process too?
Absolutely. Yeah. I have a couple of my closest friends are, one lost her spouse several years ago, so she's on her own and struggling. Another hasn't really been in a serious relationship for all the time I've known him, which is probably 40 years. And you can have a quality life without a partner, without a spouse, without a family. But in my instance, being with Peter has allowed parts of me to come alive and to develop that I probably had despaired of. And the key is the trust thing of being able to relax into trusting this person, to have your best interests at heart, to love you, to want to be with you, to cheer for your success, to wish you no ill or harm in any way. I mean, that was transformational in terms of the experience of that, getting deep inside the experience of that. was transformational. Yes.
And then I also love the fact that you were talking about how you were finding it hard to trust people because of what happened in your family. You were kind of holding yourself back a little bit. So what allowed you to fully open up?
Yeah, I don't know that, I mentioned in the book that my great friend Nick, who's no longer with us, once said to me, Neal, a lot of people would like to love you, but you got to let them. And I thought, no, I know you're right, but I don't know how to do that. And so I think it's just a time that it has to be organic. It has to be, my radar are on constantly. And, I have a very small but very tight circle of people who I know love me, and I love them a great deal. Dear friends, some of them childhood friends. But it's like it takes a lot to penetrate and get in very far. And I'm still pretty cautious when it comes to that. I love a lot of people. Go ahead, sorry.
And you also talk about struggling about coming out with your sexuality because you were like, you weren't sure if it was maybe a byproduct of what your dad did to you and things like that. So let's talk about that, because during that time it wasn't, I don't want to say PC because it's still, people are still thinking it's not PC, but I say you live your life, you do what you want to do. But during that time in the 60s and 70s, I can't even imagine what you went through because it wasn't like.
Yeah, it's hard for people who didn't live during that period to visualize. When I grew up, the church said you were a sinner, the law said you were a criminal, and the psychiatric establishment said you were sick if you were what they called then homosexual. It's like, well, holy shit. Thanks a lot. And there was no recognition there was no visible gay community. That all followed the Stonewall riots in the late 60s. I was 22 by then. So in my professional writing, I worked with this and I developed this concept called the imprinted arousal pattern, which I talk about in the book. And a lot of my clients, gay, straight, bisexual, would come in and talk about being able to respond sometimes in ways that really upset them and disturb them and confuse them according to the same erotic stimuli that happened in their abusive experience. And if you were a straight man molested by a man and you were able to respond erotically to the same circumstances, it was really confusing. And a good friend of mine, I mentioned another Michael who died of AIDS. He had a very difficult and traumatic early life and had gotten to a point where he felt really good about his sexuality. And then he felt like AIDS, I think in what he said was, it's just the proof that I'm just a dirty little faggot. And so that a part of the battle is the acceptance of self in your whole being, in your whole, so that was you're right. It's a very confusing part of, because again, there weren't models and you don't know growing up. Is it because what he did to me that's how I respond, or is that who I am? And it takes a while to sort that out.
And you struggled with it. I'm going to say up until what, 30? I mean, you were like covert, but you still struggled with it for a long time. When did you finally say, okay, screw it, I'm just going to be who I am?
Yeah, I was in my 30s, and I think that moment was again during my graduate study and my life as a baby shrink, as an early PhD and early psychologist, where I met others. So I had friends who were struggling with the same thing, and groups of us came out. I was a founder of the LGBTQ Presidents in Higher Education, a group of us who were presidents of colleges and universities and who were out lesbian and gay. And we decided we need to come out and declare ourselves and be a model and a beacon for other people to show that this is possible. It can happen. I think I know that a big deciding moment was, when you're applying for a professional job, you send in your resume. And for a while I had two. I had one that made me look like a straight man and one that, acknowledged that I was gay. And then I reached a point where I just tore up the first one. And I thought, here's who I am. And this is who's applying for this position. And you either like it or you don't like it. And if you don't like it, then, we're not going to be happy working together anyway. And I even learned kind of provocatively later on that I would send my very gay resume to like a Catholic university looking for a president and saying, here, do on this and see what you think. So it became kind of an offensive tactic as well.
But your job also took you around. I mean, you lived all over the place. Can we talk about how each city and each country that you lived in changed you? Because when you left and you left Tom Dog and you went to London, that was the beginning of your cultural experiences.
Well, actually, the earliest ones were when I declared myself a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, first time that my father disowned me. And at that time, you had to do 2 years of alternate service, and I chose to do it in the developing world. So I spent a year in Southeast Asia as a teacher running an English language school. and then a year in North Africa, where I joined Nick, who had been there the prior year. It's really a big part of my pattern of like throwing myself out into some new circumstance. The more different, the more foreign, the better, and then figuring it out, because while I was figuring it out, I was figuring myself out. And so in Laos, the most gentle, loving, accepting, embracing people, my sexuality was kind of over here because there was no way for me to, but just to have that experience again of being embraced, of being appreciated for who I was as a human being, of being respected, of being loved, that was enormously healing and curative in a way that they didn't know, but I knew, because it was a very, very soothing experience for me. And then in Algeria, I mentioned that if in Laos, the cultural sexuality was whispered, in Algeria, it was yelled at the top of their lungs. It was a very sexually overt. And Nick worked with older students that were essentially peers, and the separation of the sexes in the Muslim culture was such that it was not uncommon for guys to have sex together. And because girls were not allowed to interact, it was one factor. Another was because guys liked that. But so it was my first experience of having just fun, matter-of-fact sex with other people, and not having it be guilt-ridden, and not having it be manipulative, and not having it be forced upon me. And so that was curative in that way. In London, that was a few years later. And again, the hardest part was letting go of Tom. I would love to have put him in my luggage and taken me with me, my wonderful Irish setter. But there, I went back into a high school environment, and I was a high school counselor. And the students, the kids, were from corporate and diplomatic families. So they basically, their lives were moving around the world. And so we had kind of had that in common. We recognized each other. It was a great chemistry. And there I realized that I had a bachelor's in English when I took that job. And I realized that I had good instincts working, because I wound up working with individuals and within their families, and sometimes with their parents, and in a variety of different ways that where students needed help. And I thought, I think I have an aptitude for this, but I really should learn more if I'm going to be doing this. And so that motivated me to go back to school. And I went from London. I spent a year applying from back in the States to Berkeley, and then started graduate school. So each one of those allowed me to differentiate in ways that I hadn't before, aspects of myself that needed to be rebuilt and needed to be figured out. And they helped me, one more step out of the muck, so that I was able to stand up and look around without feeling like I was constantly in quicksand or something.
That's for sure. And do you think your life would have been different if you hadn't have taken the conscientious observer position and just fled to Canada, and instead of doing the 2 years where you went to all these to Laos and Algeria?
I'm sure it would have been different. I don't know how. I can't say that. I mentioned in the book that there's a wonderful monastery in Big Sur. It used to be called Immaculate Heart Monastery. I think it has a different name now, where in a medieval tradition, the monastic tradition, the monks will take you in and allow you to stay with them and to feed you. And so you basically have a retreat in silence. And I went there to figure out, am I going to go to jail, go to Canada, or be a conscientious objector? And I thought, it's hard for me to imagine how jail is going to be very helpful to me, or what kind of point I'm going to make by it. Canada felt like escaping, like running away, and I didn't feel right about that. And I thought, well, the government has said I can serve in this way rather than serve in this other way. So I'll serve in this way, and I'll do my part. And so that's where I landed with that one.
Yeah. So in a way, you were still honoring your dad's service by doing service of your own.
In my own way. I think that's right.
Not everybody is built to be a soldier or a sailor or anything like that. You have to do what's best for you.
I was not.
I love that. Now, do you think that you would have gotten as much healing as you did because you were able to remove yourself from these situations that you grew up with?
If I had gone to Canada instead?
Yeah.
No, I guess I don't think so. But again, I don't know what that experience would have been like. I mean, would I still be living in Canada? Would I have made the same direction? It's so impossible to know. And I had no plans, certainly. I was working with different anti-war organizations. I'm sure I could have found people to assist me if that was my decision to get me into Canada, make a life there. But it's so unknowable what that taking that fork in the road would have led to. But it's hard to imagine. I have often said, I'm a very highly educated guy. Just a lot of people's view, probably overeducated. But my 2 years living in the developing world taught me more than all my formal education together. And it's hard for me to imagine that running away to Canada would have done that. But maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, because I As I was reading your book, and each time you moved to a different part of the world, I'm like, you can see your growth. I mean, you could see it little by little as you were growing. You were growing into your own person. You became, yes, you're still part of the family. You were part of the unit that you grew up in, but you became like a butterfly. You were in that cocoon. And then once you got out and started spreading your wings, you could see the changes in you. And I was like, good for you. Good for you. You didn't allow what they wanted you to do to hold you back.
Well, it's a very insightful read, and I take that as a great compliment, because that means I was successful in conveying that part of my experience.
So why did you write the book? Why did you write it in such a way that you said that not only people who are psychotherapists can go through this and are psychology majors, but also the ordinary everyday person can pick up this book and read it?
Well, that's my hope. So about 30 years ago, I edited a book of male survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And I worked with a publisher who I collected all this material, and my editor and I looked at it, and she said, Neal, a lot of these people, they have powerful stories, but they don't know how to write. So you have to kind of sculpt their stories in such a way that the book tells that story. And so that experience never left me. That book, like this book, were never destined to be bestsellers or coffee table books, but it helped a lot of people. It was used, for example, offenders, to help them try to see the experience of the survivor, with an attempt to kind of see if it was possible to extract some empathy for them and understanding of the effects of their actions. And so when it came to this book, that was in the back of my mind. And I thought, trauma is much bigger than sexual abuse. It had to talk about the context and all of the ripples and all of the intricacies of it. And I thought, there are going to be people who are in the middle of that, flailing as I was flailing. And hopefully the book, if they find it, if they hear about it, if they get their hands on it, can be a kind of a lifeline that says, this guy did this in his way. Maybe you can derive some clues, some help, maybe even just some hope that if this guy did it, I can do it, or he found a way to work for him, I can find a way to work for me. So I think the primary motivation was hoping that this book would land in hands where it could help them, whether it's a trauma survivor, a loved one who doesn't really understand the experience of their loved one, or people studying or treating trauma survivors, maybe give them a special insight.
Yeah, because it didn't just affect your brother and you, it affected your whole nuclear family. I mean, your mom, she knew what was going on, correct? Or was she buried her head in the sand?
She has to have known.
Yeah.
So she, as I mentioned in one place in the book, my father came back from a trip to visit his family in Iowa. He drove back, brought a hitchhiker with him, a teenage boy, begged him to stay in front of my mother, begged him to stay and be his lover, essentially. My mother left for a while, figured she had no options. She went back. So she drank so heavily, and she was severely depressed. She was 18 when they married. She had 3 kids by 25. I think he was in love with her brother, who he met in the Navy. So, I mean, I think, she was a tragic figure throughout her life. And I don't think she ever felt that she had much agency. So I think she just kind of, fell into kind of a helplessness and hopelessness. And so, I don't blame her. And like I say in the book, she had her role as well, but I'm able to forgive her because I see the context of her life in a way that I wasn't my father.
Yeah. And it was sad, the demise of your mom, when your mom passed away. Luckily, your dad did call you and tell you, because your mom was in the hospice, and saying that, your mom doesn't have much longer. If you want to come see her, come see her. But then the fact that he had her cremated and you didn't know where she was. You didn't know where the ashes were or anything. And you gave your dad that proper goodbye, but you guys didn't get a chance to until later on, when you do some research and find out where the ashes might have been. And that was such a closure for you. And I was crying at that part.
Well, and I asked my father, so I was living in London. He did call me, which I say in the book I'm grateful for. I was able to go back and have a visit with her. He said, she may not recognize you. And I thought, she'll recognize me. She just chooses not to recognize you in her last days. She died about 10 days after I went back to London. And my father called me and I said, will you please save her ashes so I can distribute them when I come home? And he said, no, I already made arrangements. They're going to be scattered at sea. He didn't even know where. He didn't care. It was already, and I thought that was like the final, she and I were close. I was her favorite. It was like the final kind of like needle, the man was so disturbed that even that he couldn't allow. So like you said, years later, through some research, I put together that her ashes were spread just outside the harbor in Santa Barbara. And when Peter and I, year before last, I think it was, were making a road trip, stopped and went out and finally like, hi, Mom, nice to know where you finally got released. But all those years, yeah, I mean, it's just cruel.
I mean, I can't even imagine what your life must have been like and what you went through. And for you to come out on the other side and say, I'm going to write this book. I'm going to help other people heal when they go through trauma. And it doesn't have to be sexual trauma. It could be any kind of trauma that they go through. I mean, and you came out on the other side and I just applaud you for writing, number one, opening up your heart and writing the book. Number two, for wanting to help other people as well.
Well, thank you. What came to me as I was listening to that, and it means a lot to me, that observation again, I think an insightful read is, I sort of got early on that I'm a healer, and then there's the whole thing of the wounded healer, and the wounds, make you a better healer in many ways. And it wasn't like I sought out to be like, I chose to be a psychologist. I don't think I chose to be a healer. I think that's part of what got wired into me when I got, sent into this life. And I take it very seriously because the world needs a lot of healing. So, I try in my own small way, in my own individual way to be a healing presence and a positive presence and a loving presence, and do what we can.
Yeah. Well, our time is almost up, which I wish I could continue this conversation. Like I said, I just love this book. You saw how many pages I marked up in this book. But is there one last thing that you want to either we touched upon that you want to reiterate, or something that we maybe not have touched upon? Like one last little nugget that you want to leave us with?
I think it would be returning to the whole theme of the book hopefully being a tool for people who are struggling with their own trauma, or who love somebody who's struggling with their trauma, or who studies or works with somebody who's struggling with their trauma. Is, there are a few basic things that I think cut across gender, the type of trauma. Try to find good people and gravitate to them. Escape internally if you really have no other way to escape, and create I did this through meditation, through silence, just create a sacred, special, safe place inside. And go there if that's the only option you have. Be hopeful that there's a way out of this, that you don't have to be destroyed by this. Try to make positive and healthful decisions for yourself to the extent that you can. And there's this acronym I ran across someplace. It's PUSH. It's pray until something happens, and hold on to it, believing that something can happen. And I'm not much of a prayer person, but in your own way, whatever that represents for you, keep that alive. Those are the final things I would say. That's the heart of the matter.
Yeah, it is the heart of the matter. Now tell people where they can find the book, as well as where they can find you at.
Well, the book is available on Amazon. And I find if you did a Google search, you find all the online booksellers have it right now. So it's not hard to find. You can find me. I give at the back of the book my email address. You're welcome to email me. It's nkingphd@gmail.com. And some people have been in touch, and that's fine, and start a conversation. I'm no longer practicing psychotherapy. I am still licensed as a psychologist, but I believe that time is done for me. I do have a small consulting practice where I'm working with people on life transitions, and families and organizations on life transitions. So if someone wants to contact me for that reason, they're welcome to do that as well. And then you can find me on LinkedIn if you're, for any reason want to go through the whole chapter and verse of my professional life. It's all there.
What's up next for you? Do you have another book coming out, or do you think that this is that you healed, or do you think there'll be more?
I think what's up next for me is we live in an area that's rich in wineries, and we like wine, and I'm intrigued by wine. I say in the book that I spent a lot of years in the restaurant business and learned a lot about food and wine. So I'm thinking about doing a course to train as a sommelier, just something entirely different. So just really take a deep dive into wine and learn more about it, because I'm a learner too. I just, love to learn new stuff. Is there another book? Not today. I mentioned that there was a person who I made contact with who was writing in her 90s, and I told her I was so amazed and so respectful that if I'm still alert and alive at 90, I'll write something as a credit to her, as a tribute to her. So I'll let that emerge in time. I don't know what that would be.
Neal, thank you so much for coming on. And guys, I'll put in the show notes everywhere you can find the book, as well as his email address, so you can email him if you have questions. I highly recommend this book. I mean, as you can see, there's hardly a chapter that I didn't put something down. I mean, there were so many good tidbits. And I'm going to go down and I'm going to write them all in a notebook so that I have them too. And I'm also going to pass this book along to the daughter that's getting her PhD right now. So
awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you, Melissa, so much for the visit, for the invitation, for the chat. I've really enjoyed the chance to spend time with you. Thank you.
All right. Until next time, guys. Bye.